Is Zinedine Zidane one of the greatest players in football history? Yes. But is he also one of the shyest, most soft-spoken managers ever to walk into a top-flight dressing room? Also yes. Is he a tactical genius, dissecting heat maps and drilling formations for hours on end? Not really. His own former colleagues openly admit he barely spent 15 minutes on defensive shape before a Champions League final. And yet, is he the only coach in the history of the modern Champions League to win the trophy 3 years in a row, back to back to back? Absolutely. Which leaves us with a problem that nobody inside the game really wants to admit out loud. If Zidane isn't the loudest, isn't the most tactical, isn't the guy running 2-hour chalk talks or barking touchline orders, then how the hell did he become one of the most decorated managers of the 21st century? How did the quietest man in the room end up controlling the loudest dressing room in world football? In the next 40 minutes, we're going to break down something almost nobody in modern football talks about openly, the invisible force that turned a retired, ballerina-footed midfielder into a manager who bent Real Madrid, its galactic egos, and European football itself to his will. We call it aura. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why the biggest names in the sport, Ronaldo, Bale, Modric, Ramos, James, didn't just tolerate this soft-spoken Frenchman. They surrendered to him. If you've ever watched a coach screaming from a touchline and wondered why some managers do the exact opposite, barely speak, barely gesture, barely raise their voice, and still win everything in sight, then this video is for you. Stick with us, because a few chapters in, we're going to name the 4 exact ingredients of Zidane's aura, a framework you will never watch another manager the same way after learning. And here's what makes this urgent right now. The modern game is drowning in tactical geniuses. Every window, there's a new laptop coach with a slide deck full of pressing triggers, another young disciple of positional play, another guy quoting Guardiola, like scripture. And yet, when you actually count trophies at the biggest club on the planet over the last decade, you don't land on the loudest voice in the room. You land on Zidane. Silently, repeatedly, unavoidably. So here's the pact for the next 40 minutes. First, we're going to show you exactly how thin Zidane's tactical CV really was when he first took the Real Madrid job, the reports Florentino Perez himself allegedly had on him, the 3-month suspension by the Spanish Football Federation over missing coaching badges, the analysts who openly said he wasn't a coach at all, he was a manager, and there's a difference. We're going to be brutal about it because if we're going to argue that aura beats tactics, we have to prove the tactics were genuinely thin first. Then we're going to flip it. We're going to walk you through the exact moment Zidane replaced Rafa Benitez in January 2016, a change that, on paper, made almost no sense. And you'll see how, in less than 5 months, this shy man went 21 wins in 26 games, ended Barcelona's 39-match unbeaten streak in his very first Clásico, and lifted the Champions League that same season. After that comes the payoff. We're going to name the 4 pillars that make aura measurable, because contrary to what football romantics tell you, aura is not magic. It is a stack of specific, observable behaviors that only a very rare kind of manager can generate. And once you can name them, you can spot them. In Zidane, in Ancelotti, in Ferguson, in the coaches you are watching today. One question sits at the center of everything you're about to see, and we want you holding it in your head from right now. Can you win the biggest trophies in football without being the smartest tactician in the room, if you are simply the man everyone else in a room wants to win for? Zizou's answer was yes. 3 Champions Leagues in a row said yes. And by the end of this video, you're going to know exactly why. Before we go any further, we need to agree on a word. Because if this video is going to argue that aura is the reason Zinedine Zidane became one of the most decorated managers of the 21st century, then we cannot treat aura the way most football commentators do, as a romantic, unmeasurable, almost mystical vibe. That kind of talk is what makes serious analysts roll their eyes and dismiss the entire idea before you finish the sentence. So let's fix that right now. Let's actually define what aura is in a football context, the same way you define expected goals or progressive passes, as a set of observable behaviors with observable effects. In this video, when we say aura, we mean something very specific. It is the coach's ability to modify player behavior through presence alone, without needing to communicate tactically. A manager has aura when players change their intensity, their positioning, their choices, their body language, just because that manager is in the room. No tactical instruction required. No screaming. No PowerPoint. The presence itself is the instruction. Now sit with that for a second. Most of what a coach communicates in a normal week is tactical. Where to press, when to overlap, how to build from the back, what triggers to look for on transitions. This is the visible, teachable, replicable part of coaching. It's what shows up on a whiteboard, in a training session, in a pre-match briefing. And it is genuinely important. Nobody serious is arguing you can win the Champions League with zero tactical structure. But there is a second layer, and it is almost invisible, and it is almost never taught. It is the layer of how much your players actually want to run for you when they are exhausted at minute 87. How willingly your biggest ego accepts being substituted in a Clasico. How your captain talks to the referee when the game is slipping. How your bench reacts when the starter blows a chance. These are not tactical decisions. They are behavioral decisions made in fractions of seconds, and they are shaped almost entirely by how the players feel about the man on the touchline. That second layer is aura, and you can measure it indirectly in 3 ways. First, the response to substitution. Players who trust the coach take the hook silently. Players who do not, tantrum. Watch for this later in the video when we get to a very specific James Rodríguez moment. It becomes one of the most quietly damning micro-scenes of the entire Zidane era. Second, the intensity gap between the coach in the box and the coach on the sideline. Some managers see their team lose 2 clicks of intensity the moment they are suspended and forced upstairs. Others do not. The gap tells you how much of the team's energy is coming from a man himself versus from a man's ideas. Third, the ego index of the dressing room versus the number of visible confrontations. Real Madrid under Zidane had one of the most stacked ego rosters in the history of the sport. Cristiano Ronaldo, Sergio Ramos, Gareth Bale, Karim Benzema, Luka Modric, James Rodríguez, Isco. On paper, that room should have combusted every 3 months. It did not. That is not luck. That is aura, functioning as a load-bearing element of the club. Here is why this matters for the rest of the video. Once you define aura as measurable, as behavioral influence per unit of tactical instruction, you can suddenly ask a fair question that football media almost never asks out loud. Which coaches score high on it, and which coaches score low? Because it turns out that the correlation between tactical genius and aura is basically 0. Some tactical geniuses have massive aura. Some have almost none. Some minimalist managers have overwhelming aura. Some have none at all. Zidane, as we are about to show you, is the extreme case. Almost the lowest verifiable tactical output at his level of trophy count. Almost the highest verifiable aura in modern football. Which is why he is the perfect subject for this video, because he lets us isolate the aura variable almost cleanly without the tactical layer confusing the picture. So keep that definition in your head from here on out. Aura is not magic. Aura is behavioral influence with almost no tactical instruction needed. That is what Zidane had. And in the next chapter, we are going to show you, with brutal honesty, just how thin the rest of his coaching toolkit really was when he first walked into the Real Madrid dressing room. Let's be brutally honest about the tactical side because we promised we would be, and honesty is the currency for the rest of this video. When Zinedine Zidane took his first serious coaching job, it was not at Real Madrid's first team. It was at Castilla, the club's B team, in 2014. And it was not a triumphant start. In fact, one of the very first newsworthy things that happened in his tenure was a suspension. The Spanish Football Federation suspended him for 3 months for coaching without the relevant badges. 3 months. Out of a debut season. For a legend of the sport being handed one of the most privileged first coaching jobs in world football. That already tells you something about the seriousness with which the paperwork side of coaching had been approached. But it wasn't just paperwork. According to reports that circulated at the time, Florentino Perez himself, the president of Real Madrid, had internal notes on Zidane's performance as a Castilla coach that were not glowing. The word people close to that period used was very negative. Not because Castilla was losing every match. It was because Zidane, according to those reports, did not really look like a coach. He looked like a manager. And in Spanish football, those are not the same thing. Coaches, in the classical sense, are the ones who prepare the training sessions from Monday to Saturday. They design the pressing patterns. They rehearse the set pieces to the millimeter. They spend hours on video analysis. They change formations mid-match to counter the opposition. They obsess over defensive shape. They are, at their most extreme, laptop generals, think of an Andre Villas-Boas at his prime, poring over dossiers past midnight. Managers, in the classical sense, are the ones who manage people. They manage egos. They manage tension. They manage the boardroom, the press, the star player who just lost his mother, the young talent who needs a phone call at midnight. They set the emotional weather of the club, and they delegate the tactical detail to someone else on the staff. Zidane, by essentially universal agreement of everyone who has worked with him, was a manager, not a coach. Even his defenders admitted that openly. People around him at Castilla said he wasn't the guy to change formations, prepare the sessions, run different tactical layers, or drill the team in different phases of the game. That simply was not his gift. Someone else on the staff had to do that work, because otherwise it wasn't getting done at the level Real Madrid needed. And when he was suddenly promoted to the Real Madrid first team in January 2016, replacing Rafa Benitez, the honest analysts came out and said the quiet part loud. He did not have the coaching badges yet, or he had only just received them weeks before taking the job. Sources close to his sessions with the first team said his tactical work was minimal. Before a Champions League knockout tie against Bayern or Barcelona, he might spend 15 minutes on defensive shape. 15. Compare that to what Simeone or Klopp or Guardiola were putting their teams through in the same window. Is not even in the same solar system. The people who defended him during that stretch did not defend him on tactics. They defended him on something else. They said things like he has ideas, but he needs somebody next to him to prepare the sessions, to work with the players from a technical and tactical point of view. They said he was the leader of the group, but not the technical brain. They said essentially that Real Madrid had hired the captain of the ship, and they had better make sure the crew was solid, because he was not going to be down in the engine room. And it wasn't just external analysts saying this. It was people who had worked directly with him inside the club. The consistent line was, he is not the sort of coach who is going to change formations, drill you in different systems, put you through 100 different tactical variations. He is not that kind of coach. He is a different animal entirely. That is the honest picture. Zinedine Zidane, at the moment he took over the biggest club in the world, was not one of the most tactically sophisticated managers in the sport. He might not even have been in the top 100. There were assistant coaches at mid-table Premier League clubs with deeper tactical toolkits than the man who had just been handed Real Madrid. Now, if you are watching this and finding the argument compelling so far, do us one small favor before we get into the moment everything flipped. Hit the like button. It is genuinely the single biggest signal that pushes this kind of long-form football analysis to other fans who are curious about the same paradox. How does a not particularly tactical manager end up winning the biggest trophy in club football 3 times in a row? You tells the algorithm, we are not crazy for asking. Do it now, and let's get to the pivot. Because that story we just told you, the story of a shy man with thin tactics being handed the keys to Real Madrid in January 2016, does not end the way it should. It doesn't end with a slow, embarrassing decline. It doesn't end with an interim manager quietly moved back to coaching Castilla after 6 months. It ends with something almost historically inexplicable. So here is the pivot. And here is the question that the entire rest of this video is built around. If Zidane genuinely wasn't the tactical brain, if he genuinely spent 15 minutes on defensive shape when other managers would spend 15 hours, if his own internal reports were reportedly negative, and his badges were fresh out of the oven, then why on earth did Cristiano Ronaldo, at the peak of his powers, at the height of his ego, run for him? Why did Sergio Ramos, the loudest personality in that dressing room, defer to him? Why did Gareth Bale, Modric, Marcelo, Benzema, all of them, look like they would run through a brick wall on his say-so? Because it is one thing to inherit a talented squad. It is another thing entirely to inherit that specific squad, a dressing room of alpha males, world-class egos, players who had already gotten one coach fired the previous season, and get them to elevate their level rather than tear each other apart. The first, most obvious answer, and it is not the full answer, but it is the necessary starting point, is Zidane's playing legacy. And this is what we are going to call pillar, one of the 4 pillars of aura management. We will formalize the full framework later. For now, focus on this pillar alone, because it is the foundation everything else sits on. When Zinedine Zidane walked into that Real Madrid dressing room in January 2016, he was not walking in as a promising young coach who had been climbing the ladder for a decade. He was walking in as one of maybe 5 living human beings who could credibly claim to have played the game at the very highest possible level. He was the man who won the 1998 World Cup on home soil in France. The man who scored one of the most iconic goals in Champions League history, that left-footed volley in the 2002 final at Hampden Park against Bayer Leverkusen. The man who won the Ballon d'Or. The man who FIFA repeatedly named among the greatest players of all time. That resume, when he stepped into a dressing room, was not just a resume. It was a physical presence. Because when you have played at that level, you don't have to convince the modern superstars in front of you that you understand what they are going through. You do not have to earn the right to correct Cristiano Ronaldo on a finishing detail. You already have it. Ronaldo, deep down, knows exactly what Zidane accomplished in his career, and there is a hierarchy inside a dressing room that even a modern superstar cannot pretend does not exist. Analysts who worked around Real Madrid at the time were extremely explicit about this. They said in almost identical language that the reason players played for Zidane was respect. That his main thing was the respect he had accumulated from his playing days. That his coaching skill was not tactical brilliance. It was the aura he had built up as a legend of the sport being cashed in the moment he stepped onto the training ground as a manager. Now, if playing legacy were the entire story, then every retired great would automatically become a great coach. And we know that isn't remotely true. The football graveyard is full of legendary players who took over clubs and looked completely lost within a season. Diego Maradona at various stops, Roy Keane at Sunderland and Ipswich, Frank Rijkaard's post-Barcelona career, Andriy Shevchenko at Genoa, Marco van Basten at Ajax. The list is long, painful, and instructive. Legacy alone is not enough. It gets you the first 3 weeks of respect from a dressing room. After that, if you do not have the other pillars in place, the players start to test you. They probe, they push back, they start to disengage. Cristiano Ronaldo does not run through walls in month 3 for a coach who has nothing beyond a great CV. So Zidane's playing legacy was the entry ticket. It got him past the metal detector. But once he was inside the room, something else had to keep him at the center of it. Something that had nothing to do with 1998 or 2002 or the trophies on his personal shelf. That something else, as we are about to argue, was his second most misunderstood weapon, the sheer, calibrated, almost unnerving quietness of the man himself. And it happens to be the exact thing that got his predecessor, Rafa Benitez, thrown out of that same dressing room in 7 months. Let's get into it. The Rafa Benitez story is the perfect control experiment for everything we are trying to explain about aura, and almost no football fan properly appreciates how instructive it really is. Because Rafa Benitez, on paper, in January 2016, should not have been failing at Real Madrid. He was a decorated coach. He had won a Champions League with Liverpool in 2005 in one of the most famous finals of the modern era. He had won a Europa League with Chelsea. He had domestic titles across Europe. His CV was serious and detailed, and in the classical sense we defined earlier, he was a coach, someone who prepared, drilled, planned, structured, reviewed. And yet, in roughly 7 months at Real Madrid, he lost the dressing room so completely that the biggest names in the sport were visibly disengaged by December. Cristiano Ronaldo looked openly angry on the pitch. Gareth Bale looked pissed. The players, according to reports at the time, felt Benitez was interfering rather than motivating, tinkering rather than trusting, and above all, failing to bond with anyone in the group on a human level. Read that carefully. Failing to bond. This was a manager whose entire calling card was preparation and organization, and inside 7 months, the players had decided that the preparation did not matter because the human connection wasn't there. They were not saying his tactics were wrong. They were saying that the man was not connecting with them, and once that gap appeared, everything else fell apart in real time. 7 months. That is how quickly a decorated tactician with no aura can be broken by a dressing room like Real Madrid's. If you needed a control group for what happens when tactics show up without presence, this is it, on tape, in a real season. Now zoom in on the transition itself. On the day Benitez was sacked, Real Madrid did not go out and hire a proven manager. They did not chase a Champions League winner from another league. They did not pursue the hottest young name in Europe. They promoted the coach of their B team, a man who, by his own admission, had only just gotten his badges. A man who had never managed a first-team match in the top flight. A man who was, in every objective career metric, a step below the man they had just fired. Look at that decision from the outside for a moment. Look at how absurd it should have been. Florentino Perez had made 11 managerial appointments in 12 years across 2 spells as president. This was a club that had recycled coaches at industrial pace, that had hired the biggest names in the game and fired them just as quickly, that lived on impulse and prestige and headline-grabbing decisions. And in a moment of crisis, they reached down into their B team and pulled up a shy man who had never done the job before. Analysts at the time openly asked whether this was the right time for someone like Zidane to be given such responsibility at the biggest club in the world. The tone was skeptical, sometimes borderline mocking. 15 minutes of tactics, they said. He needs someone next to him to prepare the sessions, they said. He is so quiet and shy, they said. It just doesn't strike me, one veteran analyst said openly on television that a quiet, shy man is going to be able to motivate the players inside the dressing room. And here is where it gets almost surreal. Less than 5 months into his first senior coaching role, this quiet, shy, tactically minimalist manager had already overseen 21 victories from 26 matches at Real Madrid. 21 out of 26. Take that in. That is not a slow adjustment period. That is not a manager finding his feet. That is a man walking into the biggest dressing room in the world and immediately raising the ceiling. The Benitez to Zidane switch is one of the cleanest natural experiments football has ever handed us. Same players, same club, same season, same fixture list, same physical fitness, more or less, same tactical constraints from the roster. The variable that changed was the man, and the outcomes moved not by a few percentage points, but by an entire order of magnitude. The pillar we are watching operate here is silent presence, and it works because presence, in a dressing room of superstars, is almost inversely proportional to volume. Coaches who scream are coaches you can tune out. Coaches who lecture are coaches you can nod through. Coaches who threaten are coaches who show you exactly how much power they actually have, usually less than they claim. But a coach who says almost nothing, who walks into a room and gets noticed before he has to speak, who lets the silence itself carry the message, that coach cannot be filtered out. You cannot argue with him because he is not arguing with you. You cannot outshine him because he is not competing for shine. He simply is. And in the alpha economy of a dressing room, the man who is not competing for status is the man who has the most of it. The people who worked around him described this in nearly identical language, over and over again. He walks into a room, and without even seeing him come in, you know someone has walked in. He is the sort of person who gets noticed straight away, just the way he carries himself. He controls the dressing room because of the respect and class the man has. You listen to his press conferences and everything like that, and he has got an aura. That is the second pillar. Playing legacy gets you into the room. Silent presence keeps you at the center of it. And once those two are in place, the third pillar becomes possible. And that third pillar is where Zidane went from a lucky replacement to a certified serial winner. The moment you can point to and say, this is when Zidane went from novelty to authority, is a classico. Not just any classico, a specific one. In April 2016, less than 3 months into his tenure, Zidane's Real Madrid traveled to face a Barcelona side that had gone 39 games unbeaten across all competitions. 39. That is not a hot streak. That is a documented era. That Barcelona was one of the most complete versions of the post-Guardiola project. Messi, Suarez, Neymar up front, Iniesta and Busquets still humming in midfield, a defense that trusted itself, a manager in Luis Enrique who had already lifted the Champions League with them the previous year. Zidane's Madrid went into the Camp Nou and beat them. Cristiano Ronaldo was patient. He watched the play develop, and he produced one of those late-game moments that only he could seem to conjure on demand. And the run ended. 39 games unbeaten over. The narrative of that Barcelona team deflated, and the narrative of Zidane as a serious manager born. Credit where it is due. This match did not turn on a tactical masterclass. Zidane did not out-scheme Luis Enrique on the whiteboard. He did not draw up a bespoke pressing trap. What he did was walk his team into the most hostile arena in club football on the back of 5 months of quiet reset work and let his players play with an intensity they had not shown all season. That is the aura effect at work. And it is why analysts started reevaluating him almost overnight. You could feel the difference in the way people talked about the team. This Real Madrid, under Zizou's guidance and Ronaldo's brilliance, looked worlds ahead and worlds more resilient than they had under Rafa Benitez. And this was the same group of players. Same names on the team sheet. Same tactical DNA at the club. What had changed was the temperature of the room. 5 months later, in May 2016, Zidane won the Champions League. His first as a manager. Not a domestic cup. Not a knockout run interrupted in the round of 16. The Champions League. The trophy that had defined his own playing career at Hampden Park in 2002 was now the trophy he had just won on his very first attempt from the touchline. It was, statistically, one of the most improbable first-year coaching runs in the history of European football. But that was not the story. The story was that he did not stop. Real Madrid won the 2017 Champions League final, going back-to-back. He added a La Liga title along the way, the 33rd in the club's history, his 4th major title as a manager in 18 months on the job. And then, in 2018, they did it again. 3 Champions Leagues in a row. 3 consecutive years of lifting the biggest trophy in European club football, in an era when the competition was arguably as strong as it has ever been. Bayern, PSG, Barcelona, Juventus, Atletico all fielding elite squads, season after season. If you compress everything Zizou won at Real Madrid across both of his spells of the club, the number that comes out is staggering. 10 titles altogether that he won across those 3 years. 10 astonishing achievements, and he did it his way. He did not scream. He did not overhaul. He did not chase the tactical fashion of the moment. He simply kept extracting elite individual performances from a group of alpha players who, under any less magnetic coach, would have started tearing each other apart within the season. And this is now the moment in the story where the paradox becomes fully visible. Because up to this point, somebody could have argued, okay, won Champions League, maybe he got lucky. The knockout rounds are chaos. Anyone can string together a hot run. But nobody has ever accidentally won 3 Champions Leagues in a row. That is not luck. That is not a run of good draws. That is a coaching effect, whether it fits the traditional definition of coaching or not. And by the way, if you are still with us at this point in the video, and you want to keep seeing this kind of deep analysis of the real forces that shape modern football, not just the tactics, not just the transfer gossip, but the human machinery that decides who actually wins, hit subscribe and turn on the bell. There are more of these paradox breakdowns coming, and you do not want to miss them, especially the one we have queued up on why Carlo Ancelotti keeps beating younger, technically sharper tacticians even now. Which brings us to the framework. Because you cannot look at 3 consecutive Champions Leagues at a shy, tactically minimalist manager doing what supposedly cannot be done, and just call it fate. That is intellectually lazy, and this channel is not intellectually lazy. There has to be a system underneath. A repeatable stack of behaviors that generated this outcome. And there is. We are going to name it right now. 4 pillars. Once you know them, you'll spot them everywhere. In Ancelotti, in Ferguson, in the very short list of managers who bend elite dressing rooms without shouting. Let's build the framework. Here is the framework. This is the piece of the video we hope you carry with you long after you close the tab. Because once you have it, you will spot the pattern in every elite manager who has ever bent a superstar dressing room without raising his voice. We call it the 4 pillars of aura management, for specific, observable capabilities that, when stacked in the same coach, produce the kind of unshouted, undramatic dominance that Zinedine Zidane exercised over Real Madrid across 2 spells. Miss any one of the pillars, and the effect collapses. Have all 4, and you get something almost supernatural. Pillar 1, playing legacy at the ceiling. The coach must have a personal playing career that, when the players in the dressing room look him up, causes them to stop mid-scroll. This is not the same as being famous. There are plenty of famous ex-players who fail as managers because their playing careers, however celebrated by fans, are not at the ceiling of what their current players have achieved. Zidane's ceiling was the actual ceiling. World Cup winner. Ballon d'Or winner. Champions League hero as a player. There was quite literally nowhere higher a player in that Real Madrid dressing room could point on the manager's CV. That creates a permanent hierarchy that no press conference and no tactical dispute can ever erase. Pillar 2. Silent presence that fills a room. The coach must generate what we can only call gravitational silence. When he enters a space, people notice before they see him. When he chooses to speak, people lean in because the words are rare. When he does not speak, the silence is not empty, it is loaded. Everyone who worked with Zidane described this identically. He walks into a room, and without even seeing him come in, you know someone has walked in. He does not talk much. When he does, it lands. This is the opposite of the noisy, motivational, animated manager archetype. Is the anti-Klopp. And in dressing rooms of extreme egos, it works better precisely because it does not compete with the egos, it simply outranks them. Pillar 3. Ruthless ego management with no visible cruelty. The coach must be able to make hard, unpopular decisions about the biggest personalities in the room without becoming the villain of the story. This is genuinely difficult. Most managers who try to manage a Cristiano Ronaldo or a James Rodríguez either surrender too much and lose the room's respect, or they clamp down too hard and become the enemy that the room unites against. Zidane did neither. He kept the biggest egos in line by simply refusing to let them become bigger than him, but he did it so quietly that even the players who lost minutes could not really direct their anger at him personally. He always seemed to have the ruthlessness cushioned inside the calm. We are going to get to specific examples very shortly. Pillar 4. Radical trust in individual brilliance. The coach must know when to step out of the way. This is the pillar that most modern coaches have the hardest time with because their entire identity is built around adding tactical value. Every training minute, every whiteboard session, every dossier is an attempt to add. Zidane understood something that most of them do not. When you have Cristiano Ronaldo, when you have Modric, when you have Ramos, when you have Benzema at his peak, sometimes the highest leverage coaching decision is to reduce your own intervention. Let them cook. Trust that the individual talent is enough if the emotional environment is right. Then simply hold that environment in place, week after week, and let the individual moments accumulate into trophies. Now, the important thing about this framework is not that these 4 pillars exist in isolation, is that they compound. The playing legacy amplifies the silence because when a legend does not speak, it lands harder than when a rookie does not speak. The silence amplifies the ego management because you cannot argue with someone who is not arguing back. The ego management amplifies the trust in individual brilliance because once egos stop tearing at each other, individual brilliance has room to breathe. And the individual brilliance amplifies the playing legacy because trophies keep validating the coach's authority every May. That is why aura is so hard to fake and even harder to replicate. It is not one trick. It is a stack. Get 1 pillar and you are a footnote in coaching history. Get 2 and you are a decent manager. Get 3 and you are respected in your era. Get all 4 in the same body, at the same time, in front of the same dressing room, and you are Zinedine Zidane. Over the next 4 chapters, we are going to take these pillars one by one and show them operating in specific, documented moments from Zidane's Real Madrid tenure. The receipts, in other words, that turn the framework from theory into a system you can use to evaluate any coach in the world today. We will start with a pillar most people think is obvious, but almost nobody understands correctly. Playing legacy. Why most great players fail as managers, and what Zidane did that they did not. We are going to spend this chapter on the first pillar, playing legacy at the ceiling, because it is the pillar that most people misunderstand the fastest. It looks obvious from the outside. Great player becomes coach, players respect him, everyone wins. But if it were that simple, the coaching landscape would be full of former Ballon d'Or winners running elite clubs. It is not. In fact, the graveyard of great players who failed as managers is one of the most consistently packed graveyards in sport. Let's start with the honest question. Why do most legendary players fail as coaches? Because playing legacy on its own is a wasting asset. It starts full on day one and depletes in real time. Every dressing room reserves a certain amount of default respect for a legend the day he arrives, and that default respect burns down with every training session where the players quietly notice that the messaging isn't landing, the man doesn't seem prepared, or the decisions look impulsive. Diego Maradona is the textbook case, arguably the greatest player who has ever lived. His managerial career, across the Argentina national team and various club jobs, was defined by moments of pure charisma, followed by long stretches of confused organization. Dressing rooms started with full reverence and ended with quiet doubt. The legacy was there, but the pillars underneath it were not, and when the legacy alone runs out of runway, there is nothing to catch you. Roy Keane at Sunderland, then Ipswich. A player of ferocious personality, an elite playing pedigree. His team started with hunger and structure, but the deeper the seasons went, the more his ego management became volatile rather than ruthless and sidecom. The players started to fear him rather than surrender to him. Fear works for 6 months. Aura works for years. Those are very different currencies, and Keane, brilliant as he was spending the wrong one. Frank Rijkaard won the Champions League as a coach at Barcelona in 2006, which puts him in a much better category than the previous 2. But even his story, once the initial dressing room grip loosened, ended in a slow slide back down. His subsequent stops did not carry the same weight because the legacy alone could not carry them once the surrounding pillars weakened. Andriy Shevchenko at Genoa. A legendary striker, a Ballon d'Or winner, revered across 2 clubs and a national team. His tenure at Genoa was cut short in a matter of months. The default respect was there. What was not there was the compounding stack. Marco van Basten at Ajax, similar story, one of the most gifted attackers ever, and yet the transition into the top job never really clicked. Compare all of this now to Zidane, and something clicks. Zidane did not treat his playing legacy as the whole strategy. He treated it as the foundation, the thing that got the door open, and then he allowed the other pillars to do their compounding work behind it. That is why his legacy did not deplete the way Maradona's did in Argentina, or the way Keane's did at Sunderland. But there is a second point here, and it is subtle, and it matters. Zidane's specific playing legacy came in a form that translated unusually well into managerial authority, because he was not just a great player. He was a great player of a specific kind: elegant, intelligent, calm, somebody who never seemed to sweat under pressure, somebody who ran the tempo of games rather than sprinting through them. That kind of playing memory is exactly the kind that inspires confidence in a modern superstar. It signals this man has been where you are mentally and physically. He has controlled Champions League finals with his mind. He is not going to panic on the touchline the moment things get tight. Compare that to a legendary striker like Shevchenko or a legendary destroyer like Keane. Their playing memories, however brilliant, do not translate as smoothly into the calm controller archetype that a superstar dressing room implicitly wants from its manager. Aura is not just about how big your career was. It is about what kind of career it was, and whether that career type maps onto the modern job you are being asked to do. Notice how much this cuts against the football media narrative that great players always make bad coaches. That narrative is lazy. The truth is more specific. Great players who were the calm brain of their teams, and who couple that legacy with the other three pillars, tend to make extraordinary coaches. Great players who were pure specialists or pure enforcers, without the compounding stack, tend to struggle more visibly, and faster. Zidane is the extreme good case. Maradona is the extreme cautionary case. The distance between them is not about talent as a player. It is about how the playing type maps onto the managing type, and how many other pillars are present to reinforce that mapping. So when you look at a new managerial appointment tomorrow, some retired star being handed a big job somewhere, do not just ask, is he a great former player? Ask instead, what kind of great player was he? And does he have the other three pillars in place, or is he trying to coast on the legacy alone? That single reframe will predict outcomes more accurately than any tactical dossier the club releases in the press conference. Next chapter, the silence. Because Pillar 2, in practice, is even weirder than Pillar 1, and Zidane's version of it might be the most unusual in the modern era. You have to sit with Pillar 2 for a while before it starts to make sense, because everything about modern football coaching culture pushes in the opposite direction of it. The touchline microphones, the animated gestures on repeat, the theatrical post-match interviews, the tactical dressing downs half caught on television. Modern coaching as a public performance has become louder every single year, which is exactly why Zidane's silence hits so much harder in comparison. Let's get one thing clear. Zidane is not merely quiet. Many managers are quiet in front of the camera. He is quiet inside the dressing room, inside the training ground, inside the corridor, inside the airplane. And the people who have worked with him have said again and again that he is one of the least talkative human beings any of them have ever encountered in a professional football environment. You could be with him in the dressing room and never hear about anything one former teammate said about his playing days. He never talks to anyone. Even other elite players who had shared dressing rooms with him for years, described him as almost unreachable, not in a cold way, but in a quality of attention way. He does not participate in the chatter. He does not fill silences. He does not gossip. He does not chirp at referees. He does not put on a show for anyone. And here is where the coaching effect kicks in, because a coach who does not fill silences forces the players to fill them themselves. The players start listening to each other more because the top of the hierarchy is not adding noise. The captain talks more. The senior players talk more. The talking is redistributed downward, which is one of the healthiest signs a dressing room can show. It means responsibility is being shared, not monopolized by the man on the touchline. Compare that to a coach who dominates the sound in every room. Every meeting is his monologue. Every training break is his voice. Every substitution is his justification. The players in that model become receivers of instruction rather than co-authors of the game plan. And when the game finally starts and the coach is stuck in the technical area, unable to talk them through every second, they suddenly have to make decisions on their own. And they have not practiced it because someone else has been making them all week. Zidane's silence was practice in disguise. The players in his room got constant reps at running their own conversations, their own tension management, their own emotional regulation, precisely because the coach was not doing it for them. By the time the ball rolled in the 90th minute of a Champions League final, they had spent 6 months making decisions in silence, next to each other, under his watching but non-intervening gaze. That is one of the most underrated forms of coaching in world football, and it looks like absolutely nothing from the outside. There is a second, deeper effect. When a chronically quiet coach finally does speak, really speak, not small talk, everyone in the room stops. Because speech from a normally silent authority carries 50 times the weight of speech from a chronically loud one. Zidane rarely gave impassioned dressing room speeches, if reports from that era are to be believed. When he did, they landed. Every single word was scarce, therefore every single word was expensive, therefore every single word was heard. Journalists who covered his press conferences and closed-door interactions described the same effect from a slightly different angle. He is a politician, one analyst said. A man who is here to motivate, to manage the balance of the squad, the egos. The word politician here is not an insult, is a technical description. Politics, in the dressing room sense, is the management of coalitions, energy, and morale, and silence, applied at the right moments, is one of the most powerful political tools available to any leader in any domain. There is also the physical dimension of his silence. Multiple people describe the way he simply walks into a room and the room notices. He is not doing anything specific. He is not making an entrance. He is not calling for attention. But without even seeing him come in, they say, "You know, someone has walked in." That is a very specific kind of presence and can be practiced, but only up to a point. Most of it is who you are or who your history has made you. For coaches who lack this natural silent presence, no amount of coaching school training will replicate it. That is the harsh, aristocratic truth of Pillar 2. Some managers are given it. Some are not. What you can do, if you are not born with it, is at least stop actively working against it. Stop over-talking. Stop filling silences. Stop performing every emotion for the room. Even that partial version of the pillar improves things. But when you get the full version, the way Zidane had it, you get something you cannot bottle. You get a dressing room where the loudest signal is the coach's silence, and the players work harder to earn a nod from him than they would to escape a lecture from someone else. Which sets up Pillar 3 perfectly. Because a coach who can rule a room without speaking has quietly terrifying leverage over the egos inside it. And in the next chapter, we're going to watch him use that leverage on one of the most famous egos of his era. Pillar 3 is the one that separates the merely respected quiet manager from the serial trophy winner. Because in a dressing room like Real Madrid's, a dressing room stacked with players who have won everything, who earn generational wealth, who have their own commercial empires and their own opinions about how the team should play, the coach has to be willing, at some point, to make somebody unhappy. And he has to be able to do it without becoming the story himself. The clearest documented example of Pillar 3 in action came during a fairly routine moment in a game, the substitution of James Rodríguez. James, at that moment, was a young superstar coming off one of the most explosive individual World Cups anyone had seen in recent memory. He was a marketable global name, a Golden Boot winner, a player who had been signed to Real Madrid specifically because of his ceiling as a match winner. He was, in short, exactly the type of ego that most coaches would tiptoe around. And Zidane took him off. The reaction, when James got to the sideline, was documented in real time. He threw his equipment, he cursed, he was, according to one blunt account, furious about being substituted. The kind of tantrum that television loves to zoom in on. The kind of moment that becomes the story of the entire match if it isn't handled correctly by the man in charge. Now watch what Zidane did not do. He did not have a public confrontation on the touchline. He did not make the moment about himself. He did not call James out in the press conference afterward. He did not manufacture a beef for the cameras. He also, and this is the critical part, did not walk it back. He did not fold. He did not apologize the next day. He did not gently reinsert James into the starting lineup to smooth things over. He just kept doing what he was going to do. And the message, delivered without a single loud word from the manager, was crystal clear. If a young star's ego gets a little too big, it is snuffed out. Not with drama, not with theatrics, just snuffed. And once the rest of the room sees that happened to one of the biggest names on the roster, the rest of the room recalibrates. Every ego in that dressing room quietly adjusts its own thermostat because they have all just seen what happens when the thermostat drifts too high. This is what we mean by ruthless ego management with no visible cruelty. There was no cruelty. Zidane did not humiliate the player. He did not turn the dressing room against him. He simply refused to bend around the tantrum. And in doing so, he preserved the single most fragile piece of any elite locker room, the sense that the manager is bigger than any individual player, no matter how famous, no matter how brilliant, no matter how commercially valuable. The larger point about Pillar 3 is that it is impossible to fake. You either have the internal steadiness to let a superstar sulk without reacting, or you do not. Coaches who need the players to like them, Coaches who need the players to validate them, coaches who cannot tolerate short-term disapproval, those coaches will always bend around the loudest ego in the room. And once they bend once, the room notices and the aura is gone. Not next month. That same day. Zidane never seemed to need the room's approval on any individual decision. He needed the room to trust him overall, but he did not need them to agree with him in any specific moment. That is a very rare psychological setting for a coach at that level, especially a coach who is otherwise as personable and warm as Zidane was reported to be. The combination, warm as a man, ruthless as a decision-maker, is exactly what makes Pillar 3 so difficult to replicate anywhere else. There is a broader pattern here beyond the James Rodríguez moment. Across Zidane's tenures, biggest name after biggest name got moved, benched, or reallocated without turning into a public feud with the manager. He had full control over the team. Egos did not get too big for him. James, when he tried, got snuffed. Others did not try, because they had seen what had already happened to the one who did. This is what silent, ruthless leverage looks like in a dressing room. Is not screaming. Is not fine-based discipline. Is not tabloid warfare. Is a coach who, having earned respect through pillars 1 and 2, cashes that respect in one quiet moment at a time, and preserves the hierarchy without ever making a scene of it. Every era's greatest managers have had some version of this ability. Sir Alex Ferguson had it. The famous hairdryer treatment was actually only part of the story. The deeper part was his willingness to sell any player, no matter how celebrated, the moment they became bigger than the group. Ancelotti has it, in his softer, more paternal register. Guardiola has it, in his more confrontational, academic register. All of them, in their different flavors, share Pillar 3. Zidane's flavor was maybe the most restrained of all of them. And for that specific Madrid roster at that specific moment in history, quite possibly the most effective. Which leaves us with Pillar 4. The pillar that most modern coaches, drunk on their own tactical toolkits, either cannot or will not embrace, the willingness to step out of the way and simply let elite players be elite. Pillar 4 is, in some ways, the hardest one for modern coaches to accept, because Pillar 4 asks you to do less. And doing less feels, to almost everyone in the profession, like abdicating your job. The prevailing wisdom of the last 20 years of football at the elite tactical level has been the exact opposite. Add value. Add pressing structures. Add rotations. Add positional play. Add rest defenses. Add restart routines. Add expected goals, optimizing shot selection. The whole coaching industrial complex is built around the assumption that the more tactical infrastructure you install, the better your team will perform. And within a certain range of talent, that assumption is largely correct. But at the very top of the talent distribution, the very top, the actual roof, the Cristiano Ronaldo in his prime years, the Karim Benzema hitting his transformation into a 9.5, the Luka Modric in the middle of the pitch conducting like a maestro, the Sergio Ramos launching himself at 92nd-minute corners like a heat-seeking missile, a strange thing starts to happen. Additional tactical instruction starts to have diminishing returns. And past a certain threshold, it starts to actively subtract value, because it forces elite improvisers into predetermined shapes that constrain the very things that make them elite in the first place. Zidane, whether by intuition or by design, seems to have understood this earlier and more completely than most of his peers. His famous 15 minutes of tactics before a knockout tie against Barcelona or Bayern was not laziness. It was, in retrospect, a deliberate choice. He was saying, essentially, my players already know how to play. My job is to make sure the dressing room air is clean, that the egos are stable, that everybody feels like the manager sees and trusts them. If I add too much tactical instruction on top of that, I risk polluting the clarity they already have on the pitch. The results across his tenure vindicate that choice in a way that is genuinely difficult to argue with. Because a coach who was fundamentally about individual empowerment ended up producing team achievements that had no historical precedent in the Champions League era. 3 consecutive Champions Leagues, La Liga titles, 10 total trophies in 3 years. And when he returned for his second spell at Real Madrid, he added another league title on top of it, in a very different squad configuration. The way one longtime observer put it captures the Pillar 4 idea perfectly. What Zidane has done masterfully, more than anybody, better than anybody probably in the history of football, is take a collection of players and extract the best individual performances. Extract, not construct. He was not building a tactical system that made average players look good. He was creating an environment that allowed elite players to reach their individual ceilings week after week in the biggest games of the season. That is a different job. It requires a different mentality. And it is for most coaches a scary job because it means the credit will look diffuse, the players get the highlights, and the coach gets accused of just standing there. Zidane, to his enormous credit, did not seem to care about that image problem. He was completely comfortable letting Ronaldo be the story, letting Benzema be the story, letting Modric be the story, letting Ramos be the story. He absorbed the tactical criticism without pushing back because, deep down, he probably agreed with most of it. He was not a tactical wizard and he knew it. But he also knew that his players were tactical enough on their own, and that his real job was to hold the emotional environment where those players could fully express themselves. The results speak. The team was excellently managed by Zinedine Zidane, one observer said, and when he first came in, a lot of people were skeptical about him. He was a legend on the playing field, but would he be able to do it as a manager? Well, he did. Not by being the tactical brain of the operation. By being the human architecture that held elite tactical brains in productive alignment. You have to be looking at 3 straight Champions Leagues, one commentator said, and wondering if that will ever be done again. He is right to wonder. Because the Pillar 4 discipline required to pull that off, the willingness to trust individual brilliance and get out of the way, is genuinely rare, and every year the coaching profession pulls harder in the opposite direction. Every new generation of coaches is more tactical, more interventionist, more data-driven, more insistent on adding value with every session. Which means the number of Zidane-type managers, the ones with the confidence to subtract themselves at the right moments, is probably shrinking, not growing. They wanted to mimic his perpetual desire to be the best. That is how his players described the environment he created around them. He did not have to instruct them to want it. He simply modeled the wanting and let the wanting infect the room. That is coaching at a level that does not show up in any playbook. That is aura running the training ground like weather. 10 titles in 3 years. Astonishing achievements, and he did it his way. His way. Not the fashionable way. Not the tactical fundamentalist way. Not the volume-first way. His way, which turned out to be silent, ruthless, patient, and trusting, all at the same time, in the same body, in front of the same dressing room. 1 chapter left. And we are going to zoom out because the story of Zidane is really the story of a very specific kind of managerial gift, one the modern game may not know how to produce anymore. Here is the thought we want to leave you with, and is not about Zinedine Zidane specifically. It is about what he represents. The modern football industry is designed top to bottom to produce and reward tactical coaches. The coaching badges are tactical. The academies are tactical. The interviews, the press coverage, the analytics revolution, the transfer market, the tactical Twitter accounts, the tactical podcasts, the tactical YouTube channels, all of it points toward the same archetype. The coach as chess player, the coach as tactical scientist, the coach as system designer. It is a beautiful archetype in many ways, and it has produced some of the most enjoyable football the sport has ever seen. But it has almost no room in it for what Zidane was. Because Zidane, at his core, was not a tactical scientist. He was a human amplifier. He was a man whose primary skill was to make elite talent around him more of itself. Louder, braver, more consistent, more willing to run in the 88th minute of a knockout tie in Munich in April. That skill does not show up on any tactical dossier, in any Wiskow clip, in any expected goals model. And yet, when you actually count trophies at the very top of the sport across the last decade, it turns out to be one of the most trophy-generating skills that a football manager can possibly possess. Which raises an uncomfortable question that this video wants to plant in your head for the rest of the season. Are we, as a football culture, producing enough of these managers anymore? Because if the training pipeline, the badge system, the media incentives, the tactical fashions are all pushing in the direction of the interventionist, laptop-carrying, whiteboard-obsessed archetype, then the specific set of gifts that made Zidane possible may quietly disappear from the game. Not because the talent is gone, but because the ecosystem no longer recognizes it as talent. It looks like laziness from the outside. It looks like an ex-player coasting on his fame. It looks like a lack of preparation. Only the trophy count retroactively reveals it as one of the highest forms of managerial art there is. Zidane is proof that aura, properly cultivated and rigorously applied, can outrun the most sophisticated tactical minds of a generation. And the modern game, in our humble opinion, would be a poorer place if it forgets how to make room for that kind of manager, because everyone got too busy chasing the newest pressing scheme instead. So here is where we ask you to do a few things if this video was worth your 40 minutes. First, if you found this framework useful, the 4 pillars of aura management, hit the like button because it tells the algorithm that long-form football tactics plus culture content is worth pushing to other curious fans. It genuinely helps, and it costs you nothing. Second, subscribe and ring the bell, because we are just getting started on this series about the invisible forces that shape modern football, and the next few videos are going to apply this same lens to other managers you think you already understand. There's a Carlo Ancelotti breakdown coming that is going to explain, using these same 4 pillars, why he keeps beating younger and technically sharper coaches even now. You do not want to miss it. Ring the bell, and it will land in your notifications the moment it drops. Third, and this is the important one, we want your take in the comments, and we want it specifically. Not great video. Not loved it. We want you to answer 3 questions. 1. Which other current manager, in your honest opinion, has genuine aura at the Zidane level? Give us a name, and give us the pillar you think they are strongest in. 2. Do you think Sir Alex Ferguson, if he had never won a single title, would still have been considered an all-time great manager on presence alone? Or do the trophies do all the retroactive aura work? 3. And this is the one that will get people yelling in the replies. If you had to pick between Zinedine Zidane and Pep Guardiola to manage your favorite club for the next 5 years, knowing everything you know about how they operate, who do you take and why? Drop the answers in the comments. Read what other people are saying. Argue politely. This is exactly the kind of conversation this channel exists for. Zinedine Zidane is one of the most decorated coaches of the modern era. He did it without shouting, without lecturing, without inflating himself, without leaning on the tactical fashion of the moment. He did it by being the man in the room that everyone else wanted to win for. He did it his way. And whether or not football ever produces another manager quite like him again, he made sure the ceiling of what a coach could be without a whiteboard is now on the record, in silver, 3 years in a row. The most aura manager in football history. And the game, we suspect, will not fully appreciate what he was until it has to try and fail to replace him.